friends, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, episodes 4 through 6. Today, it was just announced that Secret Lives of Mormon Wives got a green light for season 2. What? Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I am so excited. I could not imagine not having more of this in my life. Seriously, I'm loving the show. But here's what's so fascinating about it coming back. Guess who is not returning? That's right, Whitney and Jen, because Jen's husband said she can't because he doesn't want to, make himself look like an idiot on TV. So here we are, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives on Hulu. Season 2 is coming, minus Jen and Whitney. And I'm going to be honest, I feel that it's going to be interesting to see with Whitney and Jen gone what the drama is going to be, because I think they were the source of most of it. As I'm going to recap episodes 4 through 6, there's a lot of things that Whitney says that makes her grandiosity appear even bigger than it is with what we know now. Whitney says in some of these episodes that Mom Talk could never survive without her. And well, guess what? It is. So I need Andy and a camera stat. Just kidding. Not Andy. It's not on Bravo, but I just need a camera to capture Whitney's reaction to all of this, because I just imagine that she is seething with rage and anger. And she really thought that she was going to come out of this looking like the queen bee. And my goodness, was she wrong. So without further ado, let's get into it. So episode 4 is called The Book of Truth. And so in episode 4, where we left off with my interpretations last week is that the whole Fruity Pebbles thing, it kind of comes into episode 4. It transitions into episode 4. Here's what, Demi talked about, honestly, how Brett feels ashamed. Her husband feels ashamed. And he should not feel ashamed about this whole Fruity Pebbles thing, because I feel like Demi should have been able to discuss her intimate life without having it weaponized against her by Whitney. And I wish I could say that Whitney didn't think about it, but I think she did think about what she was doing and proceeded anyway. So, here's the funny thing. We see a lot of, Mackenzie and Michaela, to me, are two people who really seem to get Whitney and have their fingers on the pulse of who she is. And Mackenzie said about Whitney, as they're having this discussion, is that she likes to think she's self-aware. And then she laughed out loud. And so essentially kind of what we see in episode 4 is that we get more of a development of who these people are, what their character arc is going to be essentially. And we see this serious dichotomy between the really fun side of Mom Talk and the very dark side of Mom Talk, right? And so to me, Mom Talk is it's a microcosm of the greater experience as a Mormon in Utah, in my opinion. Hear me out. Because it's about how you interpret it, right? So we have these rules, we have these tenets, we have these goals. How are we going to live this? How are we going to act this out? And so Mom Talk is no different from religion or anything else. It's, a group can be used for whatever you want to use it for. It can be used to manipulate and gaslight, or it can be used for support, a sisterhood, things like that. And it just seemed like Whitney, to me, wanted to be the queen bee, whereas the other ladies genuinely enjoyed the camaraderie that Mom Talk provides. So we're starting to see, this split with the saints versus the sinners, but then the super fun side of Mom Talk versus the dark side. And so in episode 4 through 6, we really see more coercive control between Zach and Jen and between Dakota and Taylor. And I'm going to talk about that with my whole chest, because I have no tolerance for men like this. None. Zero. Zilch. Also, by the way, I was wrong I initially said that Zach was the second cousin of Ben and Casey Affleck, because that was floating in the ether, but that actually is not true. So, not true, number one. And number two, Taylor and Dakota, it's like they're on again, off again. I said that they were broken up. I was relieved about that. So honestly, it's like with humans, these are people's lives, things are going to change from day to day. So I wanted to correct that incorrect information. And here in episode 4, we see how Zach treats Jen, and the way he treats her is a problem, period. She's the provider and he feels emasculated. And I'm sure he acts out as a result because his tiny little king baby ego is just, it's really hurt by the fact that, he wants to, pound on his chest and be the big, bad, masculine guy. But really, Zach falls into the trap that a lot of men fall into, which is that control and toxic masculinity is not masculine. That's toxic nonsense. What I find interesting here is that, so Jen basically put Zach through school and she said, my side gig provides for us, which also it's like, how much are they making? Like, I want to know how much these people are making now. I want to know how much they're making in season 2. And I want to know if I can join because that is wild to me. But so essentially, Zach, if he were a more secure person, couples will do this, right? My husband and I did this. I went to graduate school. I got my degree. I got I got into my career. My husband got into his career. And then when I got into my career, he went to grad school. And so a healthy couple, this situation can be, I got your back, you got mine. You go first, I go second, right? Couples do this all the time. But for Zach, it makes him feel threatened having his woman take care of him and giving him gambling money. And so he responds to that by trying to manipulate and control Jen in every way, shape, and form. I'm going to talk more about this when I talk about the Chippendales episode, because my God, that was mind-blowing to me to see how these two men, Dakota and Zach, behaved. Instead of Zach saying, thanks, Jen, for having my back, and I'll get yours, right? Like, you have my back now. You're supporting me while I'm going to school. Well, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to be a doctor, and I'll get your back, right? He sees it as a competition because of his king baby ego. We see in episode 4, they have this truth box activity. They each had, initially, here's the thing, they each had different colored index cards. And so initially I thought, well, this is so wild because we can see who asked which questions. But what I then noticed was that, and I saw something about this on social media as well, but really what I noticed is that they gave all the girls varied colors. We just didn't see it all in the editing. So it looked like Whitney was blue and then Demi or someone else was a different color. But in reality, they were all getting varied colors. So I'm going to squash that rabbit hole theory right now. But what is so interesting, this is the drama that started with Whitney initially that I had no idea, but her child was in the hospital with RSV, which, by the way, is an extremely serious and deadly disease for children and also adults, by the way. 2 weeks after giving birth, her husband, Connor, rushed her son, Liam, to the ER. So this child is 2 weeks old with RSV. He was at the ER. He was there for a few days when she did a dance video with him, like laying in the hospital, and they showed it on the show. And I just immediately understood what was going on in that moment. So we see here, and this is why this RSV video is important context. We see in episode 4, Whitney being jealous that people are forgiving Taylor and not forgiving her after that video. And so what this tells me is a couple of things. Number one, Whitney is an eye for an eye type of gal. Sees things as very black and white, very concrete, no shades of gray. And that is a setup for failure because that is not how life is. Her comparing people forgiving Taylor to people forgiving her for that is apples and oranges. It's not even it's like apples and elephants. It's a distraction technique, right? So she tries to triangulate and use anybody else's stuff to say, well, look at this. And why am I being treated unfairly? But that's a completely wild way to think. It's nonsensical and that's not mature. And Taylor points that out too, that this is like a wild comparison. And then we see, remember I talked about in my last episode how Demi had some anger and frustration with Taylor regarding her flirting with, or her perceived flirting with, her husband, Brett. And as I said, if we stuff and we stuff and we stuff, things are going to come out sideways and we're going to say things we don't mean. And that's exactly what happened. So first we see Demi say that Jen is too Mormon. Really what I was hearing Demi say is that she feels like Jen weaponizes Mormonism. Her quote was, you wear it as a badge of honor and it's gaggy. And they also used the word chuggy, which I didn't know that was still like vernacular that the kids were using, but chuggy just basically means dumb, lame, whatever. And again, the reason that I know that is because when you do therapy with young people, you really have to be up on the terms. Otherwise, they look at you like you're a dinosaur and it matters. So, I've always kind of kept up on it. But now that I'm out of the loop, I was like, oh, I'm still glad I know what chuggy means. So Jen gets mad and throws Demi under the bus. And then Demi calls Taylor white trash. And, the thing that I love the most about Taylor is she literally just owned everything. She was like, yeah, I'm a swinger. I flirt with people. That's what I do. And I was like, you go, girl. You know what I mean? Like, here's the thing. I could understand why Demi didn't like it. I don't know that I would love that. But at the same time, she's owning, she's not doing anything wrong. She's flirting. And that's just like a part of her kind of personality. And so I just I can appreciate when someone is like, yep, this is a character defect and I'm owning it. So I give her a lot of credit for that. And then Demi talks about, her TikToks are trashy. And she felt that Taylor was being flippant about the controversy, which in fairness, I think perhaps she was. I think she was flippant about how it would impact other people. Because she, as I mentioned last episode, she was ready to tell her truth, but not everybody else was. And so I understand Demi's underlying frustration. But again, you can't call her white trash. So then Demi says, I'm not the swinger here trying to seduce other women's husbands. So Demi allowed her resentments to fester. But what I appreciated about Demi is that she owned it and apologized and did the right thing and then left the room and gave Taylor her space. And so to me, again, it's not just how you fracture something, but it's how you repair it, right? We're all human. We all create fractures in relationships. All relationships are some sort of cycle of fracture, repair, fracture, repair. But the important part is the repair has to be there. Otherwise, the relationships cannot survive, which is why you see Whitney starting to kind of take herself away from the group, and they're not interested in that relationship anymore either, it seems, because she doesn't know how to repair it. You can't make repairs without making amends. And so then Taylor and Whitney have a convo when Demi leaves the room. And, Taylor, I just loved, Taylor is just, she's real. She's just real. She's authentic. And she's just like, why didn't you tell me that you didn't like me? And Whitney said, I don't feel like I'm your close friend. And then Whitney says, after the swinger drama, I was there for you and it wasn't reciprocated. Demi was right. Whitney is comparing. She's jealous and she's avoidant. So the bombshell comes where, well, it's not a bombshell to me, but Whitney and Demi apparently did ketamine therapy together, which, by the way, I have a whole episode on that. It's called VPR Rules for Therapy, I think with guest Lindsay Lime, where I talk about some of the pros and cons of psychedelic-assisted therapy. It is certainly not the magic bullet that everyone makes it out to be. There are situations where it is not appropriate, situations where it is, people who it's really helped, people who it hasn't. And so I just say that as a practitioner to let people know that, there can be consequences for doing that. Some good, some bad. It was interesting to hear that, according to Demi, Whitney admitted that she posted that video in the hospital for sympathy, likes, clout, and to gain recognition. And then Demi says she's the victim of her own chaos. And I was like, yes, Demi, snaps. Yes, yes, yes. Whitney is the person who she doesn't care about what kind of attention she gets. So there are some folks out there that, if we don't, as I mentioned last episode, if we don't get the unconditional love and support that we need from our parents, or from the people who we need it from, sometimes we don't care about the attention that we get. Because here's the thing, all humans need love, support, connection, and attention. We all need that. I don't care how many people try to convince themselves, I don't need that, I'm fine alone, blah, blah, blah. No. The saying it takes a village is because to survive in this world, to thrive, to be well, to be a good citizen, to be a good human, it does take a village. It takes a lot of work. And, Whitney, instead of doing that work, she, goes to taps the well of social media, right? Which, in fairness, so many people do that. But when I was growing up, I don't, want to sound like a dinosaur or like my 97-year-old grandfather, who, by the way, it's his birthday today. And I just love him so much. I posted a picture on my Instagram, Your Bish Therapist. So check that out. He's just so cute. But my point is that kids today, like when I was growing up, we didn't have social media. Thank God. I was the last generation to grow up without social media. And I'm really grateful for that. We went outside, we played, we rode bikes, we came home when it was dark. And then, it wasn't until, college for me that cell phones and the internet was really like a thing. Like we had Oregon Trail, in elementary school with a teeny computer with like that green screen, and then when someone dies from dysentery, it's just like this terrible graphic. That's what I'm used to. So I can't say that I wouldn't have done the same thing to try to garner favor or attention or what have you. I mean, I think we're talking about people who their brains are developing. So the last parts of our brain are the prefrontal cortexes, and those are the last parts of our brain to fully develop at the age of 25. And what do the prefrontal cortexes control? Impulses. Boom. So when you see someone in their 20s who is still acting very childlike and acting like a teenager, it's basically because they still are one. Our society looks at things so wild to me. They look at teenagers as adults and then people in their 20s as adults. And it's like, nah, man, people are not fully formed adults until the age of 25. And so why am I saying this? Is that there may still be some impulse control issues for some of these younger women. It's about seeking attention wherever they can get it. And so I think there's just a part of that that's generational. There's a part of that is societal. There's just a lot of complexities to that. Another thing I wanted to point out is that as soon as Demi confronted Whitney for her behavior, Whitney doubles down because, of course, she can't own it. And then she deflects by drawing attention to Taylor to try to get the heat off of her. She is masterful in how she does it. But I can, again, see right through that. It's triangulation. I talk about triangulation all the time on this podcast, and I post some of my most popular posts on Instagram are where I'll just put housewives' heads on which part of the drama triangle they're in. And it's just like so interesting because it's just always a crowd pleaser. It's just very descriptive and it makes a lot of sense. And so Whitney basically tries to triangulate people constantly so that she doesn't have to take ownership and accountability. And so what happens after doing that over and over again is you're just not going to be able to repair relationships and get anywhere. So of course she cries and she runs away. She goes into the closet and then becomes the victim to elicit sympathy. That's literally what happened. She became the victim, put herself in that role, and just because she didn't want to own her stuff. When Whitney was confronted and she's crying in the closet, you know who came to her aid? Taylor. And that's a saint move right there. And here's what I don't like about the whole I'm a better Mormon, sinner saints, is that's a true saint move. That is truly someone who is a good person who says, you know what, you and I have beef. You don't like me. You have not treated me well, but I'm still going to be there for you and support you because you're upset. And that is truly what a saint looks like. It does not look like turning your nose up at people and being judgmental and being holier than thou and trying to have some moral superiority complex. Nah, that ain't it. So Taylor, to me, whew, that girl is where it's at. She is the bee's knees. And Macy said, here's one thing I love about Macy, is that Macy is the type of friend who just gets it. She has her finger on the pulse. And Macy said, you know, Whitney leaves when things get hard. Instead of trying to figure them out and do work to figure out what's going on, she runs away from it. And Macy is spitting truth and wisdom. And, at Macy's birthday dinner, someone said that Whitney needs to feel the sting of this. It doesn't feel good and we have to learn. I think maybe Demi said that. And I agree. We have to suffer the consequences of our actions because that's the only way that authentic change and growth can truly happen. We have to fall flat on our face and say, well, am I going to lay here in self-pity and wallow, or am I going to get up, dust myself off, and try this again? And Whitney is just so afraid of trying something different. And so what I can appreciate is her fear. I recognize that fear. I can appreciate it. But unfortunately, she's allowing it to hold her back. And then unfortunately, we're seeing a person who is a little stunted and just not emotionally very healthy. So then episode 5, the Book of Broken Vows, we see that the queen bee, aka Whitney, has left the group chat. And here's what's so funny to me. Taylor doesn't care. Demi's trying to step up, and they're all like, the worker bees are just like clamoring to be like, well, who's gonna be a leader? And then they talk about, Demi being a great candidate, a good leader, which I agree. I think Demi is a good leader. And because she said a true follower seeks to understand, apologizes, and move forward. And I think that is absolutely what a leader needs to do. Leadership is not about being a sociopath devoid of empathy. It's about, which I'm not saying that about anyone on the show. I'm just saying sometimes CEOs, people, heads of companies and corporations, these are not moral figures. We need to stop trying to make people in big corporations moral somehow. But anyway, my point is that true leadership is leading by example. It's, I'm going to walk the walk. I'm going to talk the talk. I do, that's why people enjoy me, because I walk the walk, I talk the talk. I think that, Michaela and Macy are good friends to Whitney, but they also do hold her accountable. And they called her out on avoiding and running away. And then Whitney says, wow, this was wild. Whitney says, were we ever real friends? Has there always been some agenda, some sort of transaction needed? And it's like, this is literally what Demi was trying to say to Whitney the night before, is that Whitney uses people. Her relationships are transactional. So she's projecting that onto Demi, but really that's her stuff. And then this is where the grandiosity comes in that I just cackle. Then Whitney says, and I quote, "There wouldn't be mom talk if I wasn't there." Yikes. And I bet that comment is biting her in the butt, because guess what? There is. They're moving on without you, honey. Then we see Layla's divorce party, which, by the way, I love a divorce party. Here's why. Whenever people say I'm getting divorced, my literal thought, but I'm mindful to not say it, is congratulations, mazel, whatever. Because getting married does not mean that you need to live in an unhappy and abusive situation. We all deserve happiness and love and softness and support. And, not to call Carl out there, but seriously, we all do need that sense of love and support. And I think that if we are not getting that from a partner and we say, I'm putting me and my kids first, that is to be celebrated. So I think the idea of this divorce party, breaking the traditional norms of getting out of bad marriages, is a beautiful thing. And it's absolutely what should be celebrated, because marriage isn't permanent ownership. It is a mutually agreed upon bond that can be dissolved or eroded. It is not akin to slavery. It's not, I married you, so now you're mine forever. That's not how that works. Although some men on the show believe that's how it works. So anyway, we see that after Whitney leaves the group chat, no one chases her. And Whitney comes to Layla's divorce party and she says, I wanted to come support Layla. And then I have here in quotes, other motives, filming and desperate need for attention, right? So Whitney's comes to this divorce party pretending it's about Layla. It's nothing to do about Layla. It's about her own need for attention. And she shows up because no one chased her when she left the group chat, and she pulls Jesse aside, because I think, to me, Jesse seems like the easiest target in terms of someone who's just going to hear you out and maybe not hold you accountable or not say things to you. I don't know that Jesse has that relationship with Whitney. And so I think it's so interesting because Michaela and Macy are close to Whitney, but she didn't pull them aside because why is that? Because they've already held her accountable. She can't fool them. So now she's going to try to fool somebody else. And then this conversation happens. You are having issues with everyone in the group. And then she goes, what? I have not. And she starts cursing. By the way, I love a curse. Nobody curses more than Whitney. I've seen few people use the F word more than her. And then again, she goes to the same move of gaslighting. No one fucking called me, and distracting by throwing other issues out. Whitney says, I have a different perspective. You think I'm using you? Fuck you. And here's the thing. That's exactly what someone who is using someone would say. I mean, truth bomb. If you are not using someone, you're not going to say fuck you and throw them out like trash when they no longer serve you. That's the thing with Whitney. It's like, girl, you're not even clever about this. Whitney gives herself away. And she is using people. It's transactional. Relationships, I have a feeling to her, are all transactional. And unfortunately, I think she will continue to be a very unhappy person until she gets her head out of her butt and figures it out. So Whitney does what she does after that and leaves because she can't manipulate people, because the last person who she was trying to manipulate called her out on her stuff, and she's like, I'm not using you, fuck you, bye. And then, so here's the other interesting thing that Whitney said. She goes, if someone left the chat, I would call them immediately and reach out to them. And to me, that was her telling on herself that she did it to elicit a reaction from them. And that is a personality issue. Then we see Dakota. Macy has this baby mama shoot, which, by the way, I love Macy. I think she's such a great businesswoman. So they have this photo shoot, and Taylor brings Dakota so they can talk, but Macy appropriately reschedules the meeting. She's like, I don't think this is the appropriate locale for this, which I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. It's a work shoot. This is not the time to talk about drama. But what I cackled, I died. Dakota asked to get free photos because there was already a professional photographer there. So he literally just jumps in, he and Taylor, and start taking pictures. And that's the kind of stuff with Taylor that I'm like, girl, you know better than that. Do not let this cheap ass man track you down. That is wild. So then we see Michaela, Dakota, and Taylor have a discussion that kind of turned into a little bit of group therapy. So Macy talks about how she excused bad behavior with an abusive ex in her past, which kudos for talking about that, because here's the thing. We all excuse bad behavior, right? Because the fear of not being loved sometimes is great. And also, there are 1 million reasons that go into why women don't leave abusive relationships. 1 million. What about my pets? What about my kids? Where am I going to live? Am I financially independent? There are stigma. I mean, there are still a million reasons. But most importantly, a lot of people in abusive relationships say, well, I'm not good enough. And I'm here to tell you that you are, that your brain is lying to you. Nobody deserves to be treated poorly, verbal, emotional, physical abuse, any of it. It's not acceptable. Whatever it is you think you've done, you haven't. You don't deserve it. So I'm going to say that right now. And I love that Macy talked about this, and she admitted that she may be projecting a little bit and admits to Dakota exactly how she feels. Get yourself a friend like Macy, because she called out his jealousy, his possessiveness, his emotional abuse. She says that's not okay. And I'm like, girl, snaps, snaps, snaps. You are amazing. And so then we find out that basically Dakota and Taylor, their relationship has always been really tumultuous, because in the beginning, he did something and she's not over it. And so what happens is, a lot of times in relationships, someone will do something and then they can't get over it. Like, there's no getting over it. Let's say someone cheats on you, right? And you're like, I'm just going to ignore this and get past it. But what happens is you're human, you're angry, you're resentful, and pretending that you're not and just going along with a relationship. That's what this toxicity is all about for Dakota and Taylor. I'm telling you, that's what it is for sure. Is that he broke his trust. 3 weeks in, he hooked up with a girl and pretended he was with a friend. And so here's the problematic thing. She said, I love him, but I can't trust him. She cries. She said, I didn't feel good enough, because if I was good enough, he wouldn't have done this to me. And I screamed at the TV, girl, this is not a you problem. Stop trying to convince people to love you the way you deserve to be loved. Taylor's whole thing with Dakota and all these unhealthy relationships is she is trying to convince people who are incapable of giving her the love she needs. She is trying to convince them to love her. And it's like a hamster spinning on a wheel. And that is why this is toxic. And it's like a hamster wheel and we're going back and forth and we never get anywhere. And here's the problem. She's saying the problem is you lied about it. And so Dakota does what every emotionally immature person does. He focuses on everything but the lie because he doesn't want to have to admit to that. It was just wild to watch. Taylor's saying the problem is he lied. And then we watch the exact reason why Macy doesn't like him because he's like, no, that's not true. And he's doing everything. He's pulling a Whitney to do everything to say, look over here, look over here, look over here. So I don't have to admit that I lied because really the only problem is that he lied. And it's not even about the girl. It's about him. It's always been about him. And he still in that moment cannot take ownership and even acknowledge it. And that's why this relationship, it can never be successful. Marriage has nothing to do with happiness, and doing so for any other reason than wanting to is a setup for failure. So then we go into episode 6, the first book of sin. And we see Dakota wants to marry her, but in a way that I'm going to break this down because it's so sick. So he is literally begging Taylor, I want you to give in to me, surrender. That is insanity. That is the sickest, most unhealthy, codependent, wildly emotionally immature response. And the fact that Taylor doesn't see it as a red flag is also a problem. Because here's what I want to say. He wants ownership of Taylor. He wants power. He wants control. He wants ownership of her. And it's like, here's the wild thing is that she's never going to allow that because at the end of the day, she is a badass and she is never going to surrender herself like that to somebody else because, by the way, that's not what love is. Okay? Control isn't love. You're going to hear me repeat this a million times. The other weird thing that happened in this episode is that we see Taylor's mom, who, by the way, her name is Leanne. I've learned it. And by the way, I want to thank people for reaching out because when I talked about Leanne and Taylor and I posted some clips on TikTok and on Instagram, I got so much feedback from people saying, this is what a Mormon mother is. Leanne is very typical of a Mormon mother. And so I am very interested to hear people's feedback. And I've heard this from dozens and dozens of people. And I am, again, having someone come on the pod who is Mormon, converted to Mormonism as an adult. And so I want to ask her some of these questions because I think that what we're seeing is when people saying that Mormon moms are like this, I think what really that means is there's a lot of generational trauma. When we don't get the love that we need as a child, we go pretty much one of two ways. We do the same thing and repeat those generational curses, or we feel them. A cycle breaker feels it, says, I'm not doing this, and does it differently. And, in fairness, not everyone is born to be a cycle breaker. It is hard work. It is not for the faint of heart. And you have to have the resources and emotional preparedness to do it. And not everybody has that. So I think that, I have empathy for Taylor's mom and for all the women who came before her because this is we're seeing that trickle down effect, right? And this is what I talk about with generational trauma. And so, but Taylor's mom, Leanne, is so emotionally avoidant, but she has this weird scene with Taylor where she encourages Taylor to lie about being in labor and then ends up calling Dakota and talking to him. It felt very weird to me. It was the weirdest thing. It was like, so you are not going to emotionally attend to your child in any way, shape, or form, but then you're kind of going to behave like a teenager and insert yourself into her relationship and encourage her to do something that is a terrible idea. Lying about being in labor is to get someone to call you is manipulative, and that's not healthy. Here's what bothers me so much in this episode is Dakota and Zach come up with a lie to insert themselves into this girls' trip for this divorce party. And I think that it's odd. It's control. It's it's a lot of really sketchy stuff. And so we see in the trailer, we saw this, but I didn't know where the moment came in. So when Jen is talking about going to like a Chippendales type show, which by the way, this is not her divorce party. She has no control over it. Zach said being divorced and taking care of 2 kids would be tough. It's a bullshit response. So he's going to gamble, which is against their religion, but she can't go to Chippendales. This is the patriarchy, right? It's making up nonsense rules to keep women subservient. And unfortunately, I get it. Jen thinks that this is love. But as I mentioned, control isn't love. And some people conflate the two, unfortunately. I didn't miss the fact that he basically asked her for $2,500 to gamble, which, by the way, if you're in school and you're not working and your wife is the breadwinner and you have a couple kids, that's a lot of money to gamble. That's a lot. So he can do that, but she can't. And then she's working, taking care of the family. And Jen said, he's controlling, but I've never met anyone who loves me more. Again, control isn't love. Okay. So also being in a relationship shouldn't be that stressful for a consistent, prolonged period. Speaking of Taylor and Dakota, like Taylor was going to go to the trip alone without him because they had a fight before they were getting ready to leave. So Dakota shows up and apologizes so he can still come to Vegas to police her. By the way, I have talked about this girl's trip 100 times and I've never mentioned once that it was in Vegas. So I'm so sorry. I have so many notes. It's so much information. But so it clearly to me, it was a ploy so that he could go there and control her. And so the group of ladies is talking and Zach comes in and he goes, no male strippers to the group. And I'm like, bro, get the fuck out of here. Here's the thing. And this is why terrible men hate me. I have had my life threatened I'm not joking, on multiple occasions from men with these personality types because I just am allergic to them and I can't. And I also can't keep my mouth shut. And so I'm not joking. I've had, I'll tell that story one day. Maybe I'll do like a YBT short or something about it. But I've had a man and his father both threatened to kill me because in a treatment setting, by the way, because I was unable to be manipulated and I wasn't falling for their stuff and I wasn't taking their nonsense. And, a lot of men with certain personalities, just women like me, just really make them feel rage. And so I guess it's good that I'm not friends with them because I would absolutely tell Zach where to take that. Take your business elsewhere, buddy. We don't need that coercive control here, okay? Bye-bye. So then Macy admits she has a secret that she's been holding in, and she acknowledges that she does these Sinner Sunday confessions where people can anonymously on her social media confess sins. And, it seems like a very interesting scenario. And I think that while that could get a little bit dangerous because, so for example, the reason why I wouldn't do that is that what if someone comes to me and is suicidal or something's going on and then it's like, well, what do you do with that? And we're on social media. So anyway, I understand the point of it, but I'm just saying practically there's some issues there. But someone confessed that they had hooked up with Dakota before she knew that they were together. And it was likely an ex-girlfriend of Dakota who flashed back to the argument that Dakota and Taylor had about this girl. You slept with her. I can't trust you. Well, this is the same girl we're talking about. It sounds like it was an ex-girlfriend and he's been going back and forth between them both and lying to both about the other. And so I thought that was wild. Now, Jen, then we go back to this Chippendales thing. Jen says, will my husband approve? Because at first they didn't know where they were going. Jen says, will my husband approve in the name of God? And you know what Jessie said that I just, again, snaps? She said, my God is chill as fuck. And it's such a good example of how religion is interpreted, right? There are people who love to fear their deity. I personally don't get that. I don't get willingly having a fearful relationship with a deity, but it's just such a good example of like, well, Jessie's Mormon. And so for her God is chill as fuck. And I'm like, it's just our perception, right? And how we play all this out. Now we go to Whitney talking to producers. about how she, of course, avoided and didn't decide to go on this trip because her name is Whitney Avoidance Levitt. And a producer calls out the similarities between her new goal of homesteading and Hawaii, which is hilarious because I love that producers are picking up on this too. Homesteading is a fancy term for isolation. Like it's a fancy term for sustainable isolation. I should say that. Eco-friendly, sustainable isolation. So Whitney says there's a difference between running away and removing yourself from a toxic environment. There is, but not the way she's doing it. And then she says, I'm sure they're having fun, but not as much fun because I'm not there. And I'm like, girl, you have no idea. Everyone's going to be having a lot more fun without you. And I'm so sorry. But that's just the truth. So then we see towards the end of this episode where this is where it gets really hairy. Jen, literally, they're at this Chippendales and she says that she's screwed. And she walks on eggshells around Zach, which, by the way, is how people feel who are in unhealthy relationships. If you're walking on eggshells, there's subversive stuff there that needs to be talked about. And what bothered me is that this woman forced herself to look at the floor and gaslit herself into believing she had committed a sin by even going to Chippendales. And that is the kind of stuff that I'm like, that is coercive, controlling rhetoric to gaslight you to make you feel bad about something you shouldn't feel bad about. Now, if it was just personally she didn't want to do it, that would be a whole other thing. But all she's worried about is Zach. And so, Zach talks about having a traditional relationship. And sometimes traditional can be a euphemism for a lot of shitty stuff. That's a lovely way to say sometimes bigoted, hateful, abusive. There's a lot of different euphemisms for that. And when I saw Jen talking to him and she's crying and she's saying, stop for a second and think about me and my character. I'm a human being and did nothing wrong. And then he says he doesn't want to be married to her anymore. Because it's not about Chippendales, it's about his coercive control. And so here's what Jesse is missing too, because I wanted to point this out, is that if you have not been in an abusive, controlling relationship, I think Jesse lacked awareness into how doing this may impact Jen. And here's what I'll say about that is, like, on the one hand, that's not fair to Jesse, but on the other hand, it's not fair to Jen. And it's just, it's a hard situation. But I think Jesse definitely missed because she doesn't have a controlling husband, and she doesn't understand that for Jen, it could be the end of their marriage. And it's not about the Chippendales, it's about control. And that's the theme of all of this with Zach and Dakota. I'm going to be covering, Amy Phillips and I, we're going to be covering the last 2 episodes of this. Then I'm going to have on, like I said, my friend who is Mormon. And I'm going to do a couple other episodes on this as well. And then I cannot wait until it comes back for season 2. But I haven't even watched episode 7 and 8 yet. And I stopped myself after this episode because I just wanted to take it bit by bit. But really what I'm seeing with Zach here, I am not surprised that Jen is not coming back for season 2, because if she values her marriage and staying with this person, which she does, she can't do that because people seeing how he's treating her, that's making him look bad, and he needs her to stop exposing him. And so anyway, that is going to be it for me today. Please stay tuned for more wonderful episodes on this. I'm also going to be having Mandy Slutzker on, and we're going to talk about, Bravo is back, honey. We have Potomac, we have New York, we have OC, we have Salt Lake. It is on and popping. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you have all enjoyed it. And I look forward to talking for many moons about the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. Please do me a favor. Remember to follow the podcast. Give me a 5-star rating. Would appreciate that. If you enjoy me on Instagram and TikTok at Your Bish Therapist, please follow me. Also find me on YouTube, Your Bish Therapist as well. And I love the support, and I just want to thank you all. So please remember to take care of yourselves and each other, and ta-ta for now.
Disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.